Welcome to this lecture series in ethics. This is the third lecture, and this will start some analysis of the historical perspective. We are trying to understand ethics as a discipline from the historical perspective. We'll largely focus on the European context and also mention about some aspects, some important historical events that have happened in India as well. But before that, let's see the connection between religion and morality. For many people, religion and morality are synonyms because they claim that morality gains a lot, or rather is influenced immensely by religion or religious traditions and religious perspectives, which is true. There is no doubt in that. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that religion and morality are not one and the same, because there are societies, morality existed ever since human beings started socializing, because as I mentioned in the previous lecture, the need for harmonizing was so important for human social living. Human beings have to harmonize with the social existence, with the society. The clashes, the possibilities of clashes and conflicts should be minimized among individuals, between individuals, and also between individual and society. So morality addresses such concerns, such needs, and religion also plays a role, a very important role in that. But religion had many other objectives. Religions also, many religious traditions envisage to understand human reality from a different perspective. They always crave to realize the higher realities of human life, the destiny of human life, which is not clearly the purview of morality. Morality not necessarily, or ethics not necessarily deal with that. But for some religious traditions, the ultimate moral objective of humankind or human being lies in the outer world, for example, Christianity. So we'll see that very briefly now. And religious traditions and customs have tremendously impacted the formation of moral outlook. I'm just saying that they have impacted, not that they have shaped it, or they were exclusively instrumental in shaping it. They have impacted definitely, and they have influenced also. But at the same time, we cannot say that religion precedes morality. In one sense, we can say that they go hand in hand. Some of the moral concerns of any society or a particular society are being addressed through religion. So religion became a way by means of which the moral concerns of a society are addressed and communicated to the community as a whole. Particularly in the ancient societies, religion played a very effective role in communicating the moral concerns of a society to its people, which became not very effective and powerful in the modern time. Particularly in the contemporary days, though religion plays a very important role, its roles have changed a lot. Say, take for example, we are living in India, which is a democratic country, and like any other democratic country, we give importance to democratic values over and above religious values. Some of the religious practices and conventions have become obsolete in the light of contemporary modern life. That is because we value certain other things, or certain other values have become more important in contemporary life. Say for example, equality. We are also gone a lot ahead in minimizing the differences between different communities. Then gender differences have minimized, or rather we are trying to eliminate completely such differences from our society and try to develop into an egalitarian social existence. Then ancient Greek morality and ancient Indian ethics are examples where it's difficult to disentangle religion from morality. So this is what I said. This is a very important feature or a peculiar feature of many ancient societies, that you cannot disentangle religion from morality. For instance, the most important concern of ancient society in India was arguably the concept of dharma, the enquiries towards understanding what dharma is. That played a very important role in ancient society, in ancient Indian society. In ancient Greek society, there was a concern for virtue. Virtue in the ancient Greek society and ancient European society by and large played a very important role, and it appears in different contexts in different ways. There is no one single concept of virtue advocated by everyone. Rather, the concept of virtue, like the concept of dharma in India, is a very broad concept which accommodates, which incorporates many layers of meaning into it. See, for instance, in dharma, there are samanya dharma, then there is vishesha dharma, there is the varna dharma, ashrama dharma. There are different layers of dharma, and it has to be understood from all these contexts to have a comprehensive picture about what dharma is. Similarly, virtues, because in the ancient Greek tradition, usually they talk about certain virtues which are cardinal, which are treated as very important, and they are called cardinal virtues. They are wisdom, for example. Wisdom is such a cardinal virtue, which is, wisdom is not knowledge, it's something more than that. It's something inner insight about things in this world. And then you have moderate living, temperance, and then justice is another virtue, courage is another virtue. So these are all virtues which probably refer to some sort of human excellence. Wisdom is obviously a human excellence. Courage is again another kind of an excellence, which are required, which would be aspired positively by people in a society. Now again, ethics was influenced by religion. By the time, in the historical development of human societies, we can see that this is happening quite explicitly, that religion is playing a very important role. This is particularly in the European context. We can see this, that in the medieval age, Christianity was the dominant religion, Catholicism was the dominant religion, and what Catholic fathers, the philosophers, have done was they have tried to interpret the scriptures, particularly the Judaic and Christian scriptures, in the light of Greek philosophy. When they tried to do that, I mean, they took insights from Greek philosophy. They're very rich insights presented in Greek philosophical traditions, particularly the thoughts of Plato and Aristotle. They were interpreted, or rather the Christian doctrines were interpreted in the light of these philosophical insights, and in that context they developed their philosophical and ethical insights. So we can see that morality or ethics was influenced by religion at a particular period in human history in many civilizations. And we can also see growing criticism of religion. In many traditions this is quite explicit. Even in ancient societies also we can see this happening. Say, for example, if you come to the Indian context, you have the Charvakins. The Charvakins were explicitly atheist. They were criticizing the dominant Vedic civilization, the dominant Vedic philosophical outlook, and all the philosophical and metaphysical and moral insights associated with the Vedic perspectives were critically evaluated by the Charvakins, who advocated a very interesting philosophy. We hardly have any written materials, written documents from the Charvakins traditions. We have only references given mostly by their critics, which are left about the Charvakins, but still we learn a lot from them, and we know that they were people who were materialists, who advocated a life which is quite materialistic, rather than focusing more and more on spiritualistic values and spiritual enlightenment. And in the Western context, we can see that from the very beginning there is emergent parallel to the development of philosophy and ethics. There is an emergence of secularistic perspectives, which became quite dominant in the modern period with Marxism, for example. Marx was one of those philosophers who very emphatically denied the value of religious thinking, and he called religion as the opium of humanity. And again, when you come to the 20th century or 19th century, you have another philosopher or two very important thinkers. One is Friedrich Nietzsche, whose Death of God has influenced the philosophical thought of modern Europe tremendously. And then the psychoanalysis of Freud. Freud's psychoanalysis was another moment which actually was instrumental in the development of a secularist perspective in Europe during 20th century. And when you come to 20th century, later half of 20th century, particularly the writings of Jean-Paul Sartre, the novels and his philosophical writings, where he advocated uncompromising atheism, which denies the value of all religious perspectives and religious morality. He says that the very idea of God itself is a contradiction, and he was an atheist, a stronger atheist than any of his other predecessors. So we can see that, along with the criticism of religion, there is also developing a criticism or a critique of religion-based morality, religion-based ethical frameworks, which resulted ultimately philosophers to think about developing some other perspectives on ethics which is more secular and open. Before we getting into all these details, let us have a very brief historical perspective about the development of ethics in various traditions, various civilizations. Ancient contemplations on ethics focused on concepts like virtue, eudaimonia, wisdom, moderation, justice, etc. I have already just mentioned it. This is particularly in the Greek philosophical tradition. These were the concepts, these were the principles and notions which are emphasized by the ancient Greek thinkers or in the ancient Greek context. Virtues, for example. What is a virtue? I have just told you that there are different ways in which the term virtue is understood, but it's some excellence of some type. We can understand it in that way. And eudaimonia is another interesting notion which is so peculiar to the Greek civilization, and we can also see that something very similar to these concepts are available in other civilizations, in the Chinese civilization, in the Indian civilization, and various other places. Wisdom, moderation, justice, etc. And in India particularly, we can see that the concept of dharma is a very dominant notion. The whole of India's history can be understood, can be read from the perspective of how dharma is being conceived in different ages by different philosophers and different thinkers and different texts. For example, the notion of dharma that is advocated in the Vedic tradition, the Vedas, which is a very broad framework. The Vedas offer a very broad framework in discussing all these themes. You can see parallels of all the themes which are discussed in the European tradition like virtue, eudaimonia, wisdom, moderation, justice, etc. in the Vedic tradition. And this discussion is carried on by the Upanishads also. Not a very systematic discussion on these concepts, but you can find references to them here and there, and very strong references and very strong discussions in the Upanishads we can find. And when we come to Buddhism and Jainism and the Charvakins, which are known as the heterodox schools of thought in the Indian context, we can see a very different form of interpretation or set of interpretations are promoted and initiated by these traditions. I've already mentioned the contributions of the Charvakins, who denied the dominant interpretations of dharma and who also questioned the very legitimacy of the concept of dharma. And that's very interesting actually, because in the Vedic civilization, or that rather the Vedic perspective and the Upanishadic philosophical perspectives very strongly subscribe to idea of dharma, and they were all contemplating about this concept from different angles. And suddenly another school of thought which emerges and very strongly criticizes the very legitimacy of the concept of dharma and also the associated concept, because in the Vedic context the concept of dharma is associated with a kind of egocentric, rather it points to some egocentric benefits of the agent who performs dharma. Dharma is never performed for the sake of dharma in the Indian context, or rather, to put it in other words, dharma is not advocated or practiced for the sake of dharma. There is a higher perspective, there is a higher goal or objective which legitimizes the very pursuance of dharma in the Indian context. So it is in this situation we have to focus our discussion on the idea of the 4 objectives of life. Earlier it was the 3 objectives, the final objectives, the purusharthas they were called. Earlier they used to have 3 of them: dharma, artha and sukha. Dharma is righteousness, artha is anything that promotes physical pleasure and other aspects like that, materialistic spiritual pleasure, material embellishment. And then the third one is sukha. Sukha has 2 aspects. The one aspect is quite materialistic, which is called desire for physical pleasure. The other aspect is more spiritual, to put it in a context, which underlines the value of spiritual enlightenment. And this context of purushartha in which it is discussed. Again, you can find that the different traditions, Buddhism and Jainism also advocate different concepts of dharma. They don't deny the whole idea's legitimacy like the Charvakins. They also add to the debate, add to the dialogue about dharma, but they add several other dimensions to that, emphasizing and underlying certain other dimensions. But then in response to this Buddhist and Jainist philosophers, we can find that later texts which have originated in the Orthodox Hindu traditions also carry the discussion on dharma. And at one particular stage we can find that more than any other text, more than any other philosophical or Vedic document that have originated in the tradition, the epics, particularly the Mahabharata and Ramayana, gain a lot of importance in the Indian context, in the historical context of India, in the cultural history of India. These two texts, particularly Ramayana, has become very influential text in forming, in shaping the religious sentiments of Indians. And then the Mahabharata, or rather the Bhagavata tradition, all these epics contributed in shaping a very peculiar notion of dharma, which of course are not one and the same, but are very similar to each other, we can find. And Mahabharata actually opens up the question of dharma and says that it's a very difficult question. It's highly difficult and it's almost impossible to understand dharma. Dharma is such a complex concept according to Mahabharata, and it has to be understood contextually, since the context in which we have to understand dharma are innumerable. It's very difficult to a priori arrive at a concept and understanding of dharma. There also you can find that the practical knowledge aspect is understood as far as ethics is concerned, as far as morality is concerned. These are the theoretical aspects of morality that has happened in the Indian context. And then again, you can find that the discussion goes on and various other dimensions to this notion, and the concept is being added over a period of time in India's history. Now again, let's come back to virtue. The term virtue refers to human excellence, a settled disposition to act in a certain way. So here it's a kind of habitual behavior that is emphasized. Virtue is not just an accidental behavior. Virtue is not exhibited in people's behavior as such. Virtue is exhibited in conduct. It's a habitual behavior. It's a disposition. It's a settled disposition of human beings. A brave man is always brave. He or she may not exhibit his or her bravery on occasionally. Rather, he or she would exhibit it always. It's a settled disposition. To use a Sanskrit word, I think we can use the word swabhava for that. In Mahabharata, this aspect is emphasized. In one context, we'll find that Yudhishthira tells Draupadi that to follow dharma is my swabhava. It's not that I do it consciously, but it's not that I do it for attaining something. It has become my swabhava. So virtue is a conduct. Virtue is associated with conduct. Dharma is also associated with the swabhava of people who are dharmic. Virtues are both intrinsically valuable for the one who has them and are also valuable for others. This is the case with dharma as well. Both would do good for the person who possesses them as well as the society in which they are used. See, for example, the bravery of a soldier. The bravery of a soldier would help him to attain, or rather realize his self, realize all his potentials, because his very character consists in being a brave man, a courageous individual. So courage becomes a virtue for this individual, and it benefits him, the performer of actions based on courage, as well as society, because he would be able to protect the society from internal and external harm. So in that way, virtues like dharma are both beneficial for oneself as well as they are other regarding. So it's not that they are meant for others, they are meant for serving the society. The concept of serving the society is a much later concept. In this ancient period, you will find that what is dominant is not the service aspect associated with virtue or dharma, rather it is the egocentric benefits which are associated with that. I think that is quite logical, because naturally a person who was asked to perform dharma or who was asked to be virtuous would be wondering, what would I gain from this? So the ancient philosophers both in Greece and India seem to be telling their followers that it is ultimately done for your sake, not for the sake of others or for the society, but primarily it is done for your own sake, your own benefit. You have to be virtuous for your own sake. Of course, this is not the only view about it. There are different perspectives, but this is one of the dominant views. And now I'll come to the very important concept, eudaimonia. It is the feeling of contentment or satisfaction which the way one's life as a whole is going. One usual way in which the concept of eudaimonia is understood is to equate it with happiness, to translate the word eudaimonia as happiness. But this is a bit of misleading, because eudaimonia is not just happiness, it's rather, it's better to use the word contentment or satisfaction in the way one's whole life is actually going. So there is a reference to the totality of a person's life, the whole of life. You feel satisfied, you feel that you are happy. I mean, it's not that a person would be saying that I was happy yesterday but not today, or rather those were my happy days, which implies that now it is not so. But eudaimonia doesn't refer to happiness in that sense. It refers to happiness in a very broad sense. The whole of a person's life is involved, and it refers to the whole of a person's life, the satisfaction he or she gains out of living it. Now, virtues and happiness. So there is a very important connection between virtue and happiness. This is what I was trying to emphasize, particularly in both the contexts which we have been examining, both the European, the Greek context, as well as in the Indian context. There is a connection, there is a very intrinsic connection between virtues and happiness. And there is a term called eudaimonism, which says that virtues and happiness are linked, are intrinsically linked. That is what is known as eudaimonism. It's not that they are accidentally linked, they are intrinsically linked. And to say this, we may also have to raise certain questions. In what way they are intrinsically linked? Can we say that virtues are the necessary and sufficient condition for happiness? Which also means that there could be other conditions. Say, for example, I am very rich and I have a lot of money with me and a lot of other comforts around me, and I am enjoying a lot of power. All these things might add to my happiness. Okay, because the more powerful I am, there is a possibility that the happier I am. I mean, not necessary, but one possibility that there is a happiness associated with power, happiness associated with money, comforts, and various other things. But again, the propagators, the advocates of this eudaimonist tradition, both in the West as well as in India, I am using the term eudaimonia in a very, very broad sense, not in a very technical sense in which it is used in the Greek civilization. I am using it in a very broad sense, which includes happiness in the sense of contentment, satisfaction, etc. So they would argue that the link between virtue and eudaimonia, happiness, or in the Indian context, dharma and enlightenment, is definitely not accidental. It is very intrinsic, but at the same time, virtue is not only the necessary condition for happiness, it is the sufficient condition. You don't need anything else, but you just have to be virtuous. This is a kind of a spiritual perspective which you would find in the Greek tradition as well as in the Indian tradition. Dharma is not just a necessary condition, but it is the sufficient condition for enlightenment. You just have to be dharmic in order to be enlightened. Of course, I am aware of the fact that when I say this in the Indian context, I am not just making a comparison here. I am just trying to argue a point, a perspective, for a perspective which is present here. And I know that virtues are different from dharma and eudaimonia is different from enlightenment in the Indian context. There are essential differences between these concepts, but just try to understand these the similarities. I am rather emphasizing more on similarities rather than differences for the sake of understanding certain other concepts which I consider are important in this lecture. Eudaimonia is contentment or satisfaction with the way one's life as a whole is going, and virtue is the only means to happiness. So no other means. There are no other means, because you know, even if you have a lot of money, you are not necessarily happy. Even if you are the most powerful person, you are not necessarily a happy person. So there are several other factors that make one might be wondering, what is it that that is going to make me happy? There is a very interesting story in the Chandogya Upanishad where Narada goes and tells Sanat Kumara that he finds himself not really happy, not really content, I mean a mind completely satisfied. He is not aware of any particular want that he craves for. He has everything. He thinks that he has everything. I don't need anything else to be happy. I have learned a lot. I have learned mathematics. I have learned Jyotisha. I have learned sciences. I have learned whatever is available in the curricula in those days. I have learned, but still I find there is something which makes me unhappy. What is it? Then Sanat Kumara says that you have not learned the essential thing. You have not learned the very nucleus of knowledge. You know many things, but you have never captured the nucleus, the knowledge that makes everyone happy, the knowledge that essentially makes everyone happy, and the knowledge that is necessary for being happy, and the knowledge that is sufficient for being happy. That is something which you are lacking, and that is Atma Vidya in the Upanishads concept. And then Narada was instructed on Atma Vidya, which is not a kind of instruction that happens in classrooms. It's a different kind of instruction. Anyway, I'm not getting into those details. Virtue is identical with happiness and largely an agent-centric moral theory. So this is one aspect probably I would emphasize in this lecture, that the connection between the intrinsic link between virtue and happiness, when we examine it, we will find that virtue is identical with happiness. It's something which is not really different from happiness, but it is identical with happiness, and largely an agent-centric moral theory. And I've already mentioned what is meant by agent-centric moral theory, because in an agent-centric theory, who is given importance is the agent. The welfare of the agent, the benefit of the agent is very important in an agent-centric theory. And as far as the moral theory of virtue ethics is concerned, it is largely by and large agent-centric, which can be contrasted with the modern theories of ethics which are action-centric. I will refer to that slightly later. So in this agent-centric theory, as I mentioned a few minutes back, that the agent benefits a lot by being moral. So one is being moral for one's own sake. So in one sense, we can also raise a criticism against such theories by saying that they are very egoistic. They ultimately do it for the ego, for the benefit of the ego. But to do justice to this theoretical frame, what is wrong in it? What is wrong in craving for one's own benefit? So long as this craving would not hamper or would not put others into trouble. Or in this context, actually what they say is not only that it would not hamper other people's happiness, but also makes other people happy. So you are, by performing dharma, you will be happy and you will also make others happy. By performing virtue, by advocating a virtue, by practicing a virtue, which is a settled disposition, which is an excellence, you would benefit out of it and you would also benefit the society. So this is largely an agent-centric theory, and this you would find in the philosophy of Socrates, who is considered arguably as the first moralist in the Western tradition. Of course, morality existed and moral theories existed, or moral theorization existed much prior to Socrates, but Socrates tried to systematically develop a moral theory. In that sense, he is very important in the European context. And the focus is on the state of mind and character. This is from Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which talks about agent-centric theory in the following lines. It focuses on the state of mind and character, the set of values, the attitudes of oneself and to others, and the conception of one's own place in the common life of a community. So that's very important. You're not just isolating yourself and just going to the solitude of mountains and completely resigning yourself from social life. You are well within the society, like Socrates. We would find that Socrates is a very interesting philosopher, arguably the first greatest philosopher in the Western tradition, but also because he philosophized mostly in places where people would assemble. Common men would assemble in the marketplace, in certain functions, marriage functions, and other such contexts. So he brought down philosophy from heavens, from the skies to the earth by discussing it here with people, and tried to develop a perspective, a moral philosophy, which would not, where a philosopher, a moralist, or an ethical philosopher does not seem to be having, possessing superior knowledge with him and trying to advocate this knowledge to others. Socrates doesn't appear to be so. He is not a person who says that I have a superior knowledge, I possess a superior knowledge, and those who can come to me and I will teach you that knowledge. He doesn't do that. He rather went to people and tried to learn from them and tried to advocate that cooperatively, jointly, we can probably pursue the path of truth and know what ultimate reality is. And in that process of knowing ultimate reality, in that process of knowing the ultimate destiny of humankind, Socrates was associating moral knowledge as an essential component in that process. Rather, moral knowledge is the highest knowledge in Socratic framework. We'll continue this discussion with a little more emphasis on this agent-centric moral theory, and then also try to understand the Socratic ideas about ethics in the coming lecture. Now, for the time being, we'll wind up. Thank you. Bye.